The sound of frantic footsteps echoed in the narrow alley as Carl's hands trembled, clutching the worn paper bag containing his last meal. He ducked behind a dumpster, heart pounding, as a man's desperate voice called out, "Please, wait. I need your help." Carl's instincts screamed to run. He had learned that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford on the streets. But something about the voice made him pause. Peering out cautiously, he saw the man, a disheveled figure in a torn business suit, his face pale and panicked. He was clutching his stomach, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Help me," the man gasped, collapsing onto the wet pavement. Carl froze, torn between fear and compassion. It wasn't the first time he'd witnessed desperation, but this felt different. Against his better judgment, he stepped forward, offering his arm to steady the man. Earlier that day, Carl stood in line at a fast food joint, counting the crumpled bills in his pocket. His stomach growled, but he knew this meal would likely have to last him until tomorrow. As he placed his order, a commotion caught his attention. A man in a rumpled business suit stood at the counter, patting his pockets frantically. "I'm sorry," the man stammered to the impatient cashier. "I must have lost my wallet." Carl hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't have much, but he knew what it felt like to be helpless. With a resigned sigh, he handed over a few extra bills. "Add his to mine," he muttered. The man turned, startled. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll pay you back." "Don't worry about it," Carl replied, taking his tray and sitting at a corner booth. He had no intention of making friends, but the man followed him. "You didn't have to do that," the man said, sitting across from Carl. "What's your name?" "Carl," he answered gruffly. "Well, Carl, you've done me a great kindness today." The man reached into his pocket and slid a small silver key across the table. "Take this." Carl frowned. "What's it for?" "A second chance," the man said cryptically, standing and walking out the door before Carl could press him further. Hours later, Carl found himself face to face with the same man, only now the situation was much graver. The man leaned heavily against him as Carl helped him sit on a bench under the flickering glow of a street lamp. "Who are you, really?" Carl asked, his voice tinged with frustration and curiosity. The man gave a weak smile. "I'm someone who knows what it's like to hit rock bottom." Before Carl could ask more, the man shoved an envelope into his hands. "Take this. No matter what happens, promise me you'll open it." "What are you talking about?" Carl demanded, but the man's eyes closed, and his head slumped forward. Before Carl could panic, a sleek black car screeched to a halt nearby. Two men in suits jumped out, rushing toward them. "Sir, we've been looking everywhere for you." One of them exclaimed, ignoring Carl entirely as they helped the injured man into the car. "Wait. What's going on?" Carl shouted. "Leave," one of the men said coldly before slamming the door. The car sped off, leaving Carl alone with the envelope and a head full of unanswered questions. Carl returned to the park bench he called home, his mind racing. He opened the envelope with shaky hands. Inside was a business card with an address and a simple note. "Carl, thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. The key is yours. Use it to start over." "Alex," Carl's heart pounded as he pulled the key from his pocket. Could it really be true? Or was this some kind of cruel joke? He stared at the address on the card. It was in the wealthiest part of the city. The next morning, Carl decided to see for himself. He boarded a bus, ignoring the suspicious glances from passengers as he clutched the envelope tightly. When he arrived at the address, he was stunned. A massive iron gate loomed before him. And beyond it stood a sprawling mansion. With trembling hands, Carl slid the key into the gate's lock. To his shock, it turned easily, the gate creaked open, and Carl stepped onto a neatly manicured lawn. His heart raced as he approached the front door. Taped to it was a note with a single line, "Welcome home." Carl hesitated, his mind screaming that this had to be a mistake. But as he stepped inside, his breath caught. The interior was breathtaking, high ceilings, polished floors, and rooms filled with elegant furniture. Exploring further, Carl found a letter on the dining room table. It explained everything. Alex, the man he had helped, had once been homeless himself. He had rebuilt his life and become a millionaire but never forgot his roots. When Carl showed him kindness, Alex saw himself in Carl and decided to pay it forward in the most extraordinary way. Weeks later, Carl had settled into his new life. He spent his days learning how to manage the property and reaching out to others in need. One evening, he stood at the same fast food joint where he had first met Alex. A young woman stood at the counter, nervously fumbling for change. Without hesitation, Carl stepped forward and handed the cashier a bill. "Add hers to mine," he said with a smile. The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Carl simply nodded. He knew firsthand how one small act of kindness could change a life, and now, he was determined to keep the cycle going.